Hello, welcome back to No Me Callo. I won't stay quiet. I'm your host, Lomelin, and before we begin, I want you to stay with me for a moment. Maybe you're coming in tired, maybe you're coming in confused, maybe there's something in your life you can't quite explain, but you know it just doesn't feel the same anymore. And you're not sure if it's you, if it's them, or if everything simply changed. So before we go any further, breathe with me. Inhale. Exhale. Because what we're about to talk about today isn't light. And it's not one of those topics you listen to think, oh, that's interesting, and move on with your day. No, this is something you feel. This touches something in you. This brings up parts of yourself you may have been quietly trying to understand for a long time. Because this episode is one of those that makes you turn inward and ask uncomfortable questions. But also, it's one of those that makes you feel a little less alone. And the third episode of this series is called When They Stop Choosing You Because You Chose Yourself. And I want you to notice what happens in your body when you hear that. Because it's not just a title, it's an experience. It's a moment. It's a feeling that if you ever lived it before, you already know exactly what I mean. And yes, it sounds intense, I know, because it is. Because it speaks to something we don't always know how to say it out loud. Something we don't talk about. Something many of us experience in silence. Because this episode is not about leaving people behind. It's not about becoming strong and saying, you know what, I don't need you anymore and moving on. No, this is much more complicated than that. Much more human. It's when you didn't leave, but something still changed. It's when you're still there, but the connection isn't the same anymore. It's when you start choosing yourself, setting boundaries, listening to yourself more, stopping the constant self-abandonment, and suddenly, some people don't know what to do with you anymore. And that's where it hurts differently. Because there is no clear ending, no direct explanation, no conversation where everything gets resolved and understood. Just a feeling that something has shifted. And you're not sure if you should hold on to it, fix it, or simply accept it. And if something in you reacted when you heard this title, even for a second, even that small tightness in your chest, that discomfort, that little it's because you probably lived this before, or you might be living it right now. And if that's you, stay, because this episode is for you. So you know what to do. Get comfortable, grab your coffee, your cafecito, your glass of wine, or a cold beer, and get ready to chismear with me. And I want to start with something very clear, because it's important to understand this from the beginning. This episode is not about leaving people behind. It's not about that moment where you say, enough is enough, where you cut things off, where you walk away, where you consciously decide to close a cycle. No, this is something else, something much more confusing, harder to explain, even to yourself. It's when you didn't leave, but the connection did. It's when you're still there, still responding, still present in some way, but something just doesn't feel the same anymore. It's when you didn't close the door, but on the other side, they don't push it the same way anymore. There's no longer that same effort, no longer the same intention, no longer that natural energy that used to flow without even thinking about it. And you're left there, standing in the middle of something you don't even know how to name, because it didn't end, but it's not okay either. And it didn't fully break, but it doesn't feel whole anymore. And it's when you're still you, but something in the relationship has shifted. And the hardest part is that you don't always know exactly what changed. You just know, and you feel it. And that hurts in a different way, because there's no clear moment you can point to and say, you know what, this is where it happened. No big fight, no obvious betrayal, no clean ending that gives you closure. Just distance, different silences, a strange energy, an uncomfortable one that wasn't there before. But now you see less effort, less presence, less connection. And that's what makes it so confusing, because your mind starts filling in these gaps. You start asking yourself things like, what did I do? Did I say something wrong? Did I change so much? Why isn't it the same anymore? And sometimes you don't even get an answer. You're just left with the feeling. And maybe you felt it like this. You used to talk all the time, long messages, long conversations, calls that didn't feel rushed, a connection that felt easy. And now, days pass, and you don't know if you should text, if you should wait, if it's just different now, or if you're just overthinking it. Because before, it was easy. You didn't think too much. You didn't analyze everything. You didn't have to question every interaction. You just were, and now there's tension. Awkward pauses, moments where you don't know what to say or how to say it, or if you should even say it at all. Before, you could just be yourself without thinking, and now you feel like you have to measure yourself. You have to watch your words more carefully. You have to observe how the other person reacts. You have to adjust parts of yourself just so you don't make things uncomfortable. And that is exhausting because it stops feeling natural. It stops feeling safe. And it stops feeling like a space where you can just rest and be yourself. And the hardest part of all is that you don't understand why. Because you didn't choose for it to be like this. You didn't ask for it to change. You didn't want to lose it, but something changed. And even if it doesn't have a name, even if there's no clear explanation, and even if no one has said it out loud, you can feel it. And this is where something begins that almost no one talks about. Because it's not obvious, it's not visible, and it's not something people teach you how to recognize. It's the grief of growing. And no, it's not the typical kind of grief. It's not the kind where everything has a clear ending. When there's a goodbye, when there's physical distance, where you can say, okay, this is over. No, this grief is different. It's more confusing, more silent, more internal. And it's a kind of grief where the person is still there. You can see them. You may talk to them. Maybe you even still have contact, but the connection isn't the same anymore. And that's what makes it so hard to process because you don't know if you should grieve it, fix it, ignore it, or if you're just imagining things. It's like being inside something that doesn't feel like it used to, but you also can't tell if it's fully gone. And you stay in that in-between space where there's no clarity, only feeling, and growing doesn't always feel beautiful. And it's not always those motivational messages we see of you're evolving, everything is aligning. Sometimes growth feels very uncomfortable. It can feel lonely and it can feel confusing. Something growing feels like I'm losing something and I don't know how to stop it. And that hurts because a part of you wants to hold on to it, wants to bring it back to what it used to be, wants to understand what to do differently, wants to fix it. But another part of you knows that you're not the same person anymore, knows that something inside you has shifted. And even if you can't fully explain it, you feel it and you start noticing small things, but they're constant. Things you used to not even register, comments you used to ignore, now stay with you. And you replay them, you feel them, and they move something inside you. Dynamics you used to accept now feel very uncomfortable. The way people speak to you, the way they treat you, the way they relate to you. And it's not that everything suddenly bothers you. It's that you're more awake now, more aware, more connected to yourself. Things you used to tolerate because you didn't want conflict, because you didn't want to lose someone, and because you didn't know how to set boundaries. And now, you just can't anymore. And it's not that you don't want to, it's that something inside you just won't let you. And that changes everything. It changes how you respond. It changes you what you allow. It changes what you stay silent about and what you're no longer willing to stay silent about. And when you change like that, even if it's for the better, even if it comes from a healthy place, the relationships around you will also change. And when I say relationships, I just don't mean romantic partners. I mean friendships, co-workers, even family. And those relationships shift because you're no longer participating the same way. You're no longer accepting the same things. You're no longer playing the same role. And that, even if it's growth, can also feel like a loss. Because there are parts of your life that no longer fit who you are today. And even though you know it's necessary, even though you know it's part of the process, it doesn't stop from hurting. Because even though inside you might feel like, I didn't do anything wrong, I didn't change with the intention of pushing anyone away, I'm just trying to be better. The truth is, you did do something. You changed. And not the surface level change that people sometimes notice from the outside. No, this is a deeper change, an internal shift. The kind you don't always know how to explain, but you can feel it in everything around you. You healed parts of yourself, parts that used to react from fear, parts that used to say yes to avoid conflict, parts that used to stay quiet just to keep the peace. You started setting boundaries. And at first, maybe you felt a little weird, uncomfortable, even guilty, but you did it anyway. And you started listening to yourself more. That inner voice you used to ignore, that intuition you used to silence just to please others, it started getting louder, clearer, harder to ignore. And you started saying, this is good for me. I don't want this anymore, and I can't keep carrying this. And that, even though it sounds simple when you say it like that, in real life, it's a huge shift. Because it's not just what you say, it's what you stop allowing. It's what you no longer carry. It's what you no longer hold just to keep the peace. And that, even if it's healthy, even if it's necessary, even if it's real growth, also moves everything around you. Because it's not only you who changes, the dynamic changes. The way people respond to you changes. The way they reach out to you changes. The way they perceive you changes. And suddenly, things that used to feel normal with you don't work the same way anymore. And that can feel confusing because inside you, you're saying, but I'm just being more myself. And on the outside, everything starts to feel different. And that's where it hurts because you start realizing something very real. Your growth doesn't just transform you. It also reshapes you, everything around you. And you're not always asked if you're ready for that. You're not always prepared for that. It just happens. And you're left trying to understand how something that is good for you can also hurt you so much at the same time. Because not all relationships were built for the version of you you're becoming now. Some were built for the version of you that said yes to everything, didn't question, didn't set boundaries, and adapted to everyone else all the time. And this is where it gets uncomfortable because sometimes, not always, but sometimes, people don't miss who you are today. They miss who you used to be. And they don't say it out loud. They're not going to look at you in the face one day and say, you know what? I miss when you forgot yourself just to be there for me. Obviously not. That's not something people say, but it's felt. You can feel it in the energy. You can feel it in the distance. You can feel it in how dynamics shift when you start changing. Because what they miss is who you were when you were more convenient for them, when you were more accessible, when you replied faster, when you said yes without thinking too much, when you didn't question things as much, when you didn't set boundaries that made things uncomfortable, when you didn't stop to ask yourself, is this actually good for me too? More available, more flexible, easier to reach emotionally, easier to fit into what others needed from you, but less you. And that is what's hard to accept because it's not comfortable to think that someone could have felt more comfortable with you when you were less with yourself. And it's not easy to look at it that way. It's not easy to say it out loud because it touches something very deep inside of you, a part of you that starts to ask, so who was I in that version of myself? And that's where a lot of people get stuck, in that doubt, in that confusion, in that attempt to understand whether changing was a mistake or whether it was necessary. And it hurts because you don't want to accept the idea that someone might have loved you more when you were loving yourself last, when you put yourself last, when you didn't choose yourself, when you adapted just to avoid losing people. And this isn't about blaming you. It's about seeing things clearly. Because this isn't about saying no one ever truly cared about you. That's not what this is. What this is trying to show you is that some dynamics are built around versions of you that were holding much more than what you're willing to carry now. And so I want to ask you something. Who were you in that version? Did you feel at peace? Or were you just on an autopilot? Did you feel heard? Or were you just adapting? Did you feel enough or were you constantly trying to prove something? And you don't have to answer perfectly. You don't need to fully understand it right now. Just allow yourself to look at it because sometimes grief is not just about what you're losing outside of you. It's about the version of yourself that you're no longer willing to be. And here comes the fear that almost no one says it out loud. The fear that many people feel, but very few are brave enough to name. What if choosing myself means ending up alone? And if you ever felt that, I want you to know something very important. That fear is real. It's not an exaggeration. It is not weakness. It's not that you're overthinking. It's human. And it's completely normal because we're not wired to be alone. We are wired to connect, to belong, to feel like we are a part of something, to be seen, recognized, emotionally held by others. So of course, when you start changing, when you start choosing yourself, and when you start saying, this is no longer for me, I don't want this anymore, and I can't keep carrying this, something inside of you gets activated, and that part of you starts asking, what if this pushes everyone away? What if I end up with no one? What if I'm making a mistake? And that fear doesn't show up because you're doing something wrong. It shows up because you're stepping out of what's familiar. Because what is familiar, even when it hurts, even when it cost you, even when it drained you, still feels safe to the nervous system. And your mind confuses familiarity with safety. But here's where I want us to pause together, because this is where the perspective shifts. You are not losing people. You are finding yourself. And I know that at first, that doesn't really comfort you. In fact, sometimes it even feels more uncomfortable, because it doesn't fix the immediate emptiness. It doesn't give you quick answers, and it doesn't erase the uncertainty. But what it does give you, it's something deeper, clarity. Because when you start truly seeing yourself, when you start truly listening to yourself, and when you start learning how to hold yourself, some dynamics begin to change. And yes, there can be loss. We're not going to romanticize that. And yes, it hurts, sometimes a lot. But here's what almost no one tells you. Not all loss is wrong. Some losses are not punishments. They are not mistakes. They are not signs that you're doing something wrong. They are adjustments. They are the natural result of no longer forcing yourself into spaces that no longer fit who you are. Because when you change, everything around you shifts too. And that doesn't mean you're losing your path. It means you're stepping out of places where you can no longer stay yourself without abandoning yourself. And maybe that's the most important truth in all of this. You are not becoming less loved. You are just no longer betraying yourself in order to be loved. And that, even though it hurts, even though it's confusing, and even though it can feel lonely at times, is also the beginning of something much more honest with yourself. And as always, I want to recommend a book that aligns with today's episode, and it's called The Art of Loving from Erich Fromm. And this book doesn't talk about love as something romantic, but rather as something that transforms you when you begin to grow, choose yourself, and change the way you relate to yourself and others. He explains that love isn't just a feeling, but an emotional capacity that requires maturity, awareness, and inner freedom. And that is exactly what this episode explores. When you start changing, and relationships no longer feel the same. When choosing yourself redefines how you connect with others. When growth involves losing certain dynamics. When love stops being dependency and becomes awareness. This book connects because it helps you understand something very important. Not all connections can survive when you stop abandoning yourself to be accepted. And that ties perfectly into the message of this episode. You are not losing people. You are finding yourself. So I highly recommend it. And I want to close this episode with you by saying something very important. You are not difficult, even if people have made you feel that way. Even if you silently wondered it yourself. Even if you question whether you're asking for too much. You are not too much. You are not too sensitive, not too intense, and not too emotional. And you are not complicated, even if your mind has tried to explain everything over and over. Even if you try to understand why things changed. Even if you felt like you needed to fix yourself just to fit better. No, you are different now. And I know that word can hurt a little, because different can sometimes feel like a loss, like distance, like disconnection. Like something you're not sure whether to celebrate or grieve. But it can also mean something else. It can mean growth. Not the pretty kind of growth you see online. Not the perfect, linear, aesthetic version of it. But real growth. The kind you feel in your body. The kind that makes you uncomfortable sometimes. The kind that makes you question things. And the kind that forces you to see yourself again. And yes, sometimes growth hurts. And it hurts because you start noticing things you didn't see before. It hurts because you start choosing yourself in places where you used to abandon yourself. And it hurts because you can no longer be the version of you that held everything together without question. And most of all, it hurts because it changes who stays. And no one really prepares us for that. No one tells us that growing isn't just adding, it's also losing. It's also letting go. And it's also realizing that some things no longer fit you, even when you try to force them. But here's something important I want you to take with you. Even if it hurts, even if it feels confusing, even if it feels lonely at times, this is not the end of you. It's the beginning of something more honest, more real, more aligned with who you are becoming. Because yes, some people won't be able to come with you into this version of yourself. Not because you are wrong, but because you are no longer the same person. But also keep in mind, new people will come. different relationships, more conscious ones, more reciprocal ones, more free, and most importantly, more emotionally safe for you, because they won't require you to abandon yourself in order to belong. They won't need a smaller version of you to feel comfortable. They'll be able to stay with all of you. And while that arrives, I want you to remember this. You don't have to shrink yourself to be loved. You don't have to over-explain yourself to be valid. You don't have to stay in dynamics to break you just to avoid losing someone. Because at the end of the day, the question was never whether you are enough for others. The question has always been, where are you enough without having to stop being yourself? And that is the path you are starting to walk. Even if it hurts, even if it's not clear yet, even if your heart trembles sometimes. But you are here, and that's already saying so much. In the description of this episode, you'll find the Amazon link with the complete list of books mentioned in No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet, from the very first episode up to today. And don't forget that every Friday there's a new episode waiting for you. The final episode of this April series is called Sustaining Your Truth Without Asking for Permission. And I'm closing this series with you with an episode that goes straight to the heart of everything we've been working through this month. Because after talking about boundaries, guilt, the fear of losing connections, and the grief of growing, we arrive here at the moment where it's no longer about explaining yourself better, but about starting to live your truth without asking for permission. And there comes a point in this process where you choose something and not everyone understands it, where you decide differently and there's no external validation, where you hold yourself steady even when it makes others uncomfortable. And that's where you realize something very important. You don't need everyone to understand your path for it to be valid. And this episode is about learning to trust yourself without constantly seeking approval, about stopping the need to justify every decision, about no longer abandoning your peace just to be understood. Because how many times have you doubted yourself just because someone else didn't understand you? And remember that you didn't come here to be understood by everyone. Your truth does not need approval, and choosing yourself has to be enough. This is the closing of the April series, and it's an invitation to something deeper, to stop explaining yourself and start holding yourself. So I want you to sit with these 3 phrases. Write them down if you can. Today, I choose myself, even if not everyone understands it. Today, I hold myself, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Today, I stop explaining myself because I am no longer abandoning myself. So don't miss it. You were listening to No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet. I'm your host, Jessica Lomelin. Until next time.